So today on Screen Shots, we're looking at probably one of the strongest supporting performances in Australian movie history. Now, the great Keays-Byrne, who played Toecutter in the 1979 classic at Mad Max, ate up scenery like you wouldn't believe. Toecutter probably ranks as one of the best comic book villains of all time who never came from a comic book. Now, in the movie Mad Max, and the plot is almost repeatable by every person who was born or lived through the 1970s and 1980s. In a dystopian future in Australia where it seems only motorcycles and cars are on the highway and a few trucks, the leader of a gang that Toecutter is a part of, called the Night Rider, is tracked down by a police force led by Mel Gibson's character Max Rockatansky, his best friend Goose, and the various other Australian what he called rural urban peace officers. Now, in the movie, it starts off very quickly. We see that Night Rider is being chased down with his girlfriend, and he basically hates the cops. He hates what he's doing. Very psychotic. And eventually, the Night Rider, who was in jail and escaped and took a cruiser, is eventually tracked down and killed. Now, this sends Toecutter off for the edge. According to some side plots in there, Toecutter probably was, the Night Rider's number two. He remains, faithful to him in death, and he continues his legacy as some people call it banditry and anarchy. But here's the great part. Keays-Byrne, in the original Australian soundtrack or audio for the part, uses different accents to show the different aspects of his personality. Each scene he does is Shakespearean. He chooses an accent, be it Irish, Scottish, Australian, or just plain, to elaborate on the scene. And this is where the Best Supporting Actor nomination maybe was killed. The part alone was getting a lot of publicity before the awards came out, but there was some question if he should be nominated because his part in the American version was dubbed by American actors. It wasn't the Australian cut. The reason for this, speculative, is that the audio mix was so bad from the Australian cut, he needed a boost with the American actors. Everyone in the movie was dubbed. Mel Gibson, the guy who played Goose, his best friend. Anyway, it was quite bizarre. Now, when the nominations came out, not too many critics, not say remembered it, but later on he said, in 1980, what happened to Mad Max? It should have got, maybe a soundtrack or whatever. The whole movie is shot at a low budget with what he call, up-and-coming Australian actors. But at the time, it was one of the golden eras of Australian cinema. Mel Gibson a couple of years ago in Gallipoli, various Aborigine movies, various miniseries and big movie productions were showing the new form of what is considered the new wave Australia. Now, one thing about Toecutter, there's a relationship he has with his assistant Johnny the Boy. Could be pseudo-sexual or S&M or whatever. There's a very famous scene where Johnny's made a mistake. He's trying to train Johnny for him to be his murderer, or a murder by request, and he takes a shotgun and uses it as a phallic instrument to put it in Johnny the Boy's mouth during a very bizarre confrontation on the beachside. They walk in the water, and Toecutter loses his temper and takes the gun and puts the barrel of the gun directly into Johnny the Boy's mouth. That alone should have brought it to an NC-17 or an X rating. I've never seen a scene like that in the 1970s movies. Miller might have decided to use that to show how dangerous Toecutter is. But what I liked about the movie, Toecutter had various minions in his gang, and including his number two at the time, Bubba's and Eddie, who seemed to be a combination of a Robert Shaw type of Aryan presentation with a little bit of psychoism. Is very weird. And in this movie, they refer to the cops as the Bronze. And there's no real reason why they're referred to as the Bronze, could be their badges, because most of the cops dress in, well, it wasn't real leather according to producers. It was not leather fabric. But I mean, there's a lot of weird crossover with S&M culture, with sexual culture, with violent culture, especially the rape of a couple, male and female, by the way, not two females, after they accidentally knocked over Toecutter and some of the bikes at a railway station where Knight Rider's body was coming in. Not too often a male and female couple in movies like that would be raped, but that ties back maybe to the American thriller kill horror movies of the early 70s. Anyway, overall, Mad Max is one of the best movies of all time in science fiction and action. But the Australian dub is the best because the sound may be a little bit off, but if you listen to the slang and listen to the interpretation of the roles, it works much better in the Australian than it does in the English. Now, Keays-Byrne came back, actually reprised a role. We're not sure there was Toecutter as a Mad Max villain, Immortan Joe in the 2015 film Mad Max Fury Road. But let me tell you something, Keays-Byrne does something in this movie where he kind of outshines the Mad Max and the Goose character, because they are kind of happy-go-lucky. Toecutter is all business. And if you had a chance to, 3 seconds alone with Eddie Bronze, he would show them he was superior. And as he liked to say, we will teach him, Bubba. We will teach him. So on this early February weekend, we wish you good times, and watch out for the snow in different parts of the province where it's snowing. But if you have a chance, go to the special re-release edition of Mad Max in the early 2000s. It has the American dub and the Australian dub on the same DVD. Compare, contrast, and there's also a widescreen version that brings a lot more of the movie into presentation. It's showing up more and more often on AMC, TCM, different network and streaming services. But for those who've never seen Mad Max, I'm not going to give away the plot, but it is comic book style in nature, but also Shakespearean, with also an aspect of what I call accident reconstruction, because Miller, was a hospital worker for years, and some of the accidents portrayed there actually were quite accurate. Don't know why he wasn't nominated. Not for me to say. I don't even know if he even qualified, because if a voice is dubbed by the original actor, can you still be nominated? I don't have the rule book in front of me. So anyway, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, the Road Warrior, the sequel is great. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, Tina Turner as the leader of a dystopian community doesn't work for me. But Road Warrior, I don't think it's a superior movie than Mad Max. To me, Mad Max stands at his own. You can never duplicate Mad Max in any other movie, because it was of his time. Mel was young. He wasn't as hated as he is now. All the characters fit. So, have a good day. Keep your stick in the ice. Bye.